All right, the International Monetary Fund puts out every few months, I think twice a year, more to the point, these growth forecasts. And when it comes to Donald Trump, it has a good news, bad news. The good news is they think that between his tax cuts and cutting regulations, we're going to see growth in the United States that will lead growth worldwide. The flip side, the bad news is we'll also likely see some trade wars or some trade tit for tat that could involve the Chinese and the Americans and on, and that would not be good. To Apple Metro CEO PM Tankel on the coming impact of those Trump policies. So a good news, bad news deal is what the IMF is saying.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think everything's good news, bad news. You know, at the end of the day, Neil, somebody has to pay it at the bottom line. So who do we trade with?
So
the tariffs.
You mentioned a good point. Countries don't pay that.
Sorry, correct.
Consumers
the consumer pays it on the ground. And who do we trade with? Number one, first and foremost, by far, is China, is our biggest trading partner. Then comes both our borders, ironically, southern and northern border, Mexico and Canada. Top three trading partners we have. What do we bring in from them? Let's drill down and look at it. We bring in component parts. We bring in computers. We bring in appliances. Who buys appliances? You and I. Who buys cars? The consumer. So if we raise those tariffs on the Chinese particularly, we're not talking about going to war with Canada, maybe Mexico a little bit, but not any great degree. It's China.
Well, Chinese are ticked, though. We've already gotten indications from the Chinese leader that this type of talk is dangerous.
Very dangerous. It's, you know, nobody starts a war unless they think they can win. It's like the schoolyard bully. He doesn't start a fight with a guy that he thinks is going to knock him out.
But I think Trump is thinking that I don't have to act on this. Just the threat will get people to talk to me. And he's been succeeding at that with auto companies and the like.
Domestically.
Right. But it's very different when you're talking to foreign players.
And we're at an extreme disadvantage.
Well, he's done it with the Germans, with Mercedes and BMW.
Well,
you're not convinced of it.
I'm not convinced of that. We haven't seen that. It's early on. He's not even president yet. That happens Friday. But the reality...
Wait a minute. Let me write that down. Friday.
Friday. That's the day.
Gotcha.
You and I are here, by the way.
Understood.
I'll be there.
No, I'll be there.
You will be there.
You're not going?
I was invited.
Why aren't you going? Well, you like these 47
I work for a living. I'm worried about these tariffs coming in, and how am I going to buy my next car, et cetera, et cetera. You know, just as an aside quickly, I owned a company in Detroit. And I remember many years ago, the first Japanese car that came in, they parked in our parking lot. And when the guy came out, it was wrecked. The
Is that
windshield,
right?
Yes, sir, honest to God. It was, windshield was broken, and it was all keyed and what have you. It was the only foreign car in our parking lot. And what happened? 3 weeks later, there were 2 Toyotas in our parking lot, and then 4 Toyotas. Why? Why? Because of economics. At the end of the day, if they build it less expensively and they build it better, and because in those days, American cars rattled, they clunked, they clinked, they were huge gas guzzlers, and then the Japanese started bringing them in. Now, go outside. We'll go out here on 6th Avenue. What do you see? You see Toyotas, you see all kinds of Kias.
But you don't see a lot of our cars in Europe. So the president-elect was saying, you know, Mercedes and BMW, they make great in this deal. But we don't see any Chevys abroad. Now, the vice minister of Germany was saying, well, that's, if you make better Chevys, we might have more there. What did you make of that?
Well, I make that we can't make them as economically as they can over there. It's that simple. And it comes down to economics. We're at an extreme disadvantage with the Chinese in that they can change the RMB, they could devalue their... democracy has certain disadvantages to it when it comes to getting...
We're at a competitive disadvantage there. I did want to, since you're a big restaurateur as well, Applebee's chain and so much more, we've seen the minimum wage go up, and I was asking during the break if you had an impact or seen an impact.
Sure.
Because I've talked to a number of Democrats who say there's been no impact at all. You say what? I
say they're ideologues and they're not on the ground, and how do they know? How do they know if they're legislators? Obama's leaving. He never worked a day in his life in the real world, where he had to make a payroll and he had to be competitive to the marketplace. He knew how to get elected, and he knew how to be a president.
But he's saying if the trend in higher wages was hurting the economy, it's not showing it.
It's just not true.
So what are you doing? What are you saying?
We are cutting back. We're about 500 people less as we start 17 than we were at same date on 16. 500, right? Yes, sir.
And where have they gone? Those people, were they cooks, waiters, waitresses?
All of the above. All the above. They go back
who's
into
replaced
their
them?
communities.
Anyone? No one.
Yeah,
Machines.
there are
These things, right? Yeah, use those,
exactly.
right?
There's technology, and as I always say, Neil, minimum wage increases by the government is technology's best friend, because you'll find a way to get around that labor component part of it. And going back to trade wars, if you look at the trade wars of the Chinese, their wage rates are going to minimum wage, much, much less than ours. So if we think we can bring assembly plants back here or components back here or textiles back here, they pay them $3 an hour, and we'll be paying them $15 an hour. Labor generally is 30–40% of a product. Figure out.
But Donald Trump doesn't have much sympathy for that, even though companies can argue that math. He'll say, I don't care, I want you to have these jobs in the U.S.
Well, I'm not sure they come here that quickly. Where's the infrastructure for them? Where's the factories that are going to be built for them? And what are we going to pay?
How do you think he's going to do?
I think it's an unfolding situation. I think he has incredible opportunity to be the greatest of the greatest.
Really?
I think he does. I think
What makes you say that?
Because I think he's a business guy and not just an ideologue, and he has his feet on the ground, and he has an understanding.
Yeah, he's very pragmatic on these things, isn't he?
He definitely is. He definitely is. Now, will tweeting win at the end of the day? Probably not.
He says it avoids the middleman and he can get his message out. I think it's kind of dumb myself.
Well, I think he's surrounded himself with good people. I think that is dumb. And like any businessman or any entrepreneur, it's who's around you. I happen to know Jared Kushner a bit, and he's a super.
Yes, yeah.
No, Jared
I'm sorry, his son-in-law.
Son-in-law.
What do you think of Steve Mnuchin, the incoming Treasury Secretary?
I think he knows how to get it done.
But he's also talked, that is Mnuchin, I'm sorry, confusing.
Yeah, sure.
For tax cuts that are revenue neutral, particularly in the upper end, for guys like you, you're not going to see more tax savings. You'll see simpler taxes. But what do you think of that?
Well, I think that I think if we get the tax savings at the people at the bottom or the middle, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. I'll give you another quick example. When people get their tax refund checks, our sales go straight up.
Is that right?
Straight up for a week or 2 weeks till they get them. Now imagine if they have a tax savings all year long, more discretionary income, more
take-home pay, right?
And then they spend it, and they spend it where? On consumables. They spend it on dining out.
What are some of your most popular menu items?
Steak and shrimp parmesan.
Is that right?
Yeah, hamburgers.
Really? Anything heart-friendly or?
Sure.
You're desperately trying to
give it a little thought, but we certainly.
Said Zane is one of those fit restaurateurs I know. Succeed in this business, being thin and fit. That one's a mystery to me. Zane Tankel, Apple Metro CEO. He told you about all this stuff years ago. Were you listening? Well, I hope you were. Well, then again, you're watching Fox Business, so you probably were.